So this is the Lamed. Lamed in Hebrew is teach and learn. So the thing about the Mishkan pattern is that it's not just the words which have the message of what we're supposed to teach and learn. It's not just the letters of the Aleph-Bet which have a message, but there's a message in the pattern. So Jamie was talking about this pattern of breathing. If you heard the shofar just then, it was a one note, and then a kind of a rippling note, and then another note, and then a rippling. There was like these six that were in this pattern, like breathing in, breathing out, and then the rest. So on the chart, which we don't have here, that's in the other room, with the striped colors, in one position, there's like these footsteps going around in a circle on the little glyphic pattern down on the bottom of the left-hand side. And if you look real close, there's like 6 little lines and then a double line, and then 6 footprints and then a double footprint, and then 6 shoe prints and a double shoe print, and then 6 boot prints and a double boot print. It's like, what does that mean? If you can read the pattern, it's progressive development. Little lines to footprints, to shoe prints, to boot prints. It's like a developing stature, you might say, of responsibility. And yet the pattern that Yahweh told us to observe was 6 and then rest. So the long note is just rest. But the other notes, like is kind of like breathing. There's like intake and exhale, and yet they both have a certain dynamic to them, which are necessary. It's kind of like day and night. So, the question is, what do you see in the pattern? And the thing about the Mishkan pattern is that there's a message in the pattern, not just the words. So here the Lamed. So here we have this particular type of shofar has this vortex of this spiral, which is also on the top of this staff. The letter Lamed literally is the picture of a shepherd's staff. Now this isn't so much a shepherd's staff as you might think of it, in the sense that there's no crook. So I'll show you how it's drawn. The modern letter Lamed is basically like that. It might have a little thing at the top. It's basically a corkscrew shape. If you take something and then you wind it around and around, and then there's this corkscrew imagery to it. The Paleo Lamed, basically it's the backwards of our letter J. It's this pattern in a simplified form of turning around. Now, if you look in the dictionary, you'll see that the letter, or the word lamed, literally means teach and learn. It's responsive. So if you have teach, and then you respond by learning, well, if anybody's been a teacher or a student, you'll know that the way that you teach and learn is going over it and over it and over it and over. And the word to repeat, repetitions, is actually in the word lamed. If you look in the Red Dictionary, you'll see that to repeat something is the meaning of the word lamed. So the idea here to bring this particular shofar with this repetition of spirals is a lamed picture. And he also says, hear the voice of the shofar. Well, when you hear a voice so that you can shema, so that you can listen, so that you can hear, so that you can do, that all is an aspect of teach and learn. The other imagery that's in this is that it's related to the letter Kuf. Now, the modern letter Kuf is basically drawn like that. The interesting thing about the two letters is that if you have lines on a page where all the other letters are written in this area here, the lamed sticks up above it. And in the letter Kuf, if all the letters are drawn here, it sticks down below it. The interesting thing about the letter Kuf is that it, like the word kumi, arise and shine, kumiori, and hakom or hamakom is the place where something stands, and a comb, like a rooster comb or a comb that you comb your hair with, has little teeth that stand up. The word comb literally means to stand up, so the place you stand. But the interesting thing about the letter Lamed is it's the letter that stands up, and the other interesting relationship, I'm trying to show you themes within letters, is that the letter Gimel is the head of a camel. Modern letter it has a foot, but in the Paleo it's just the head and the neck of, the rest of the body is not there, but it's the head and neck of the camel, and it also means to be lifted up, or one that has pride is lifted up. So it can mean arrogant, but it might simply mean to be proud. So here you have three different letters that have to do with standing up. So the thing about the shepherd's staff, the Lamed, is that you could say, well, the shepherd's staff is that which, it's made this one a little bit higher than my head. You might think of a normal shepherd's crook to be shaped like that. Sometimes that little, which is the inverse of this letter shape here. It's the same letter shape. See, once you recognize the letter shape, it doesn't really matter whether you spin them around in any different dimension. So if you know that letter A is the first letter, if the lay is upside down or sideways, or if you happens to read it backwards, you recognize that that's the letter Aleph. And so, actually, there was one of the charts that I had made, which is a bunch of stripes, and I'd originally written these letters down the middle sideways because I was going to use that same chart for another project. And some people expressed a confusion. It's like, I don't know what these letters are. They're all 90 degrees sideways. And it's like, I didn't stop to think, well, if you know what the letter looks like, it doesn't matter whether it's sitting 90 degrees cockeyed or not. You recognize the letter. The same thing is true with the Lamed. It's a shepherd's staff, even though you might say it upside down. But the other interesting thing about the shepherd's staff is you've got the pokey end, right? And then you've got the end that pulls. So again, you've got this dynamic, these two voices. You've got these two forces. It's kind of like exhale and inhale. It's kind of like teach and learn. You have the carrot and the stick, as it were. You know what I mean by that? It's this thing where if you want to get the donkey to move, you either beat him with a stick so he doesn't want to get hit so he'll move, or you just put a carrot in front of his nose and he'll reach to go for the carrot. It's the pushing and the pulling. So within the teaching and learning is this double dynamic in everything Yahweh says. It's the same concept as the blessing or the curse. It's like, so why should we turn to Yahweh's ways? Well, we don't want the curse. Why should someone get saved? They don't want to go to hell. Or they'd like to go to heaven. That's the carrot and the stick. That's the blessing and the curse. So in everything that he told us, there's this two dimensions to it. So we say, well, what exactly did he tell us to teach and learn? Well, last week was the letter Kaf. And the letter Kaf is right next to the letter Lamed. I'm going to erase all this here. What I was going to tell you about the letter Kuf, is that it's the picture of the pillar of fire and pillar of smoke. Two dynamic issues again. So here you have this vortex, which is like a pillar of fire. So if you have this thing like a pillar of fire, it's almost like this kind of a tornado shape. That's almost like here's what it's over. It's over the Ark of the Covenant. That's almost like an exclamation point. And then if you have something billowing, like pillar of smoke, over this, boy, that's almost like a question mark. So I kind of render the combination of the question mark and exclamation point as the Paleo letter Kuf, our letter in English Q, which is a picture of the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, which is also this vortex thing here, which is the evidence of Yahweh's presence in Israel above the Ark of the Covenant, above the Mishkan tent. When he was present, when his presence was present, the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke was there. because this means standing, comb, you can infer that it has to do with verticality. Well, interestingly enough, when he says line upon line, precept upon precept, we'll get into this in a few weeks, but I want to bring this up for teaching and learning. The word for line is kuf vav. Well, as we learned before, the vav in the end is a suffix meaning it or his. So it's literally, the word for line is his kuf. His kuf. Well, the kuf is this thing that stands like a plumb line or a level that's perfectly straight that you reference your building to. That's his kuf. And when it says his precept, it was zadi vav. Again, meaning his zadi. So there's this by use, you can look through the Tanakh and you can realize, if you know how to look at the Hebrew letters, when he says his line, his precepts, we got these English words, it's like, oh gosh, what are these things? When you look at them in simply the Hebrew, it's like, it's his kuf, it's his zadi. So that's the evidence right there that these individual letters are concepts, not just words. What do they mean? Well, if you look at a picture of the Mishkan, and the way to render the Mishkan, the way I've done it on the chart, just for the simplest little glyphs possible, is you've got this big white fence with the four-color door, right? There's the Mishkan, basically. And inside you had the Ark of the Covenant, which was in its own little separate, set-apart place behind the veil with the wings of the cherubim. That's kind of like the bullet point, because inside of it was these 10 words, the 10 commandments written by the finger of Elohim on tables of stone. We'll get to those words in just a second. The tables of stone written by the finger of Elohim were in the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was in the set apart, the most set apart. The word is Kuf Dalet Shin, Kadosh, Kodashim, Kuf Dalet Shin Yod Mem. So here this is plural. Remember, Vav, Tav, and Yod Mem are the plural suffixes. So you could say, well, there was only one of them. There was one set apart place. Well, this whole thing where the menorah, table of showbread, and ark of the altar of incense was, that was also set apart, and this is the most set apart. So you see here by use that if somebody says Elohim, though it sounds plural, because when you have the Yod Mem at the end, that's plural, here's an example where Yod Mem at the end means it's simply the most. So Elohim can mean, well, more than one, but it can mean just simply the highest and the most. So here you have the Kadosh Kodashim, which is in English it's called Holy of Holies, or the most set apart place. But above this, when Yahweh was present, remember, you have this pillar of fire, like the exclamation point, the pillar of smoke, like this big question mark, which actually spread out over the entire camp of Israel. And the stuff in his words, which he called his precepts, he referred to as his zadi, right? My precepts. So if his zadi, which is this thing which sprouts back to life, it's a picture of the resurrection, actually, the letter zadi. It's a picture of a log with a flame of fire, or a caterpillar which turned into a butterfly with wings. It's this image of sprouting back to life. So if you have that these words are what causes what looks to be dead to sprout back to life. Hence Aaron's rod, he had a stick, and they said, well, which one should be the high priest? And basically Yahweh says, have all the leaders. It was the parashah of Korah, which is, I believe, next week's parashah reading, where all the leaders brought their sticks, a perfectly dead stick. And that night it sprouted, a branch with leaves, with blossoms, and with fruit and flowers. It's like, gosh, the whole thing all at once. Evidence that Yahweh's presence was designating Aharon to be with Moshe. The point here is that the kuf is the evidence of the vitality of the words in the Ark of the Covenant. If you have any question of what are the things we're supposed to regard, Should any human have any question of the matter, here's the big question mark, over the zodi, like this stuff right here, and then here's his answer, the big exclamation point. It's called an interrobang. Interro like interrogation, like questioning, and bang like this exclamation point. So any combination of a question mark and exclamation point is called an interrobang. The point is, that's what the letter Kuf looks like. As if Yahweh was saying, if there's any questions, it's this stuff right here. And it only needs one letter to describe it. It's my precepts, which are my plumb line, my line. The interesting thing about the letter Kuf is it also means a circle or a zone. So in geometry, if you have a point and you take a radius and then you swing that radius around, you form a circle, and this whole thing becomes a zone. So here's the target, and you've got these radius circles around it, and it's like, well, where's the center of the target? Where's the bullseye? It's the zone determined by stretching out the line. So here you see, here's like a radius line in the circle drawn. We'll get more into the Kuf later, but I'm trying to show you that within the drawing of the symbols of this Hebrew is the meanings of the words expressed. For example, the zodi. Here's the stick, and it sprouts. There's Aaron's rod that sprouts. There's a caterpillar sprouting a wing. There's a flame, there's a log sprouting a flame. There's the dead body of the killed one, buried in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, that suddenly comes back to life, resurrects. There's Yeshua. There's a picture of Yeshua coming back to life after 3 days and 3 nights, right there in the zodi. And after the zodi, which is the next letter, here's the letter Kuf. Remember, the Kuf is that which stands, and it's a picture of that which, remember, goes below the level, but it also means kum, arise and shine, is a picture of ascension. So in the Kuf is a picture of being buried and ascending. In the zodi is a picture of sprouting back to life. And why do I mention these things about the Lamed? Because it's the words that we're supposed to lamed, teach and learn, which are the bullet point, the thing that was put inside the Ark of the Covenant is these words. So if you look at the word for the Kaf that we discussed last week. Last week was the 11th letter. Lamed this week is the 12th letter. What I'm trying to do here each week, if you've noticed, or I'll show you a little pattern, is we say a letter, we get to the next letter the next week, but then so we're going in a forward progression, but I try to go back and touch a little bit of the bases of the previous week, just to kind of tie everything together. And then you go to the next letter, and you go back and you tie a little bit of that, and you go to the next letter, and you tie a little bit back, and so there's this pattern. It's the same thing as the Shabbat every week. You do your 6 days, and then there's the Shabbat rest. But it's not just a circle because it's stretched out over time. So it's more like if you're like this. You see, the point is there's these embedded patterns within the Scriptures. If you can see the pattern, there's a message in the pattern. The Shabbat itself is this coil pattern. And so when I'm saying I see these patterns within this, the verses that we have, it's kind of like this vortex pattern. So the Aleph is kind of like this vortex funnel, you might say. A funnel is literally something that you use to gather things up and reduce them down and to put them right there. What is the context of a tornado vortex? A tornado goes through and it picks everything up from here, scatters around and dumps it somewhere else. The Ein Sof, the unlimited one, considered every possible scenario of what he was going to make, of what he was going to do, of what it would mean, of how he would express it. And he chose this pattern, these patterns. These patterns, meaning the Aleph Bet pattern, the Mishkan pattern, the weekly pattern, the festival pattern, and the spelling of words pattern, which would be the Semitic language-based pattern. He'd predetermined all these words. And the interesting thing about Hebrew, especially looking at this ancient Paleo-Hebrew, is that all the patterns coincide. And so if somebody says, well, you're just making this stuff up. I've heard those voices before. You're just making this stuff up. And it's like, then why does it all fit? Why does it all fit perfectly? Why do they all coincide exactly? The 7 days of creation pattern, the Lord's Prayer pattern. It goes on and on. They all fit exactly. The concept of the Ein Sof, the unlimited one, taking into consideration all possible ideas, bring them around and say, I'm going to make them express just like that. Boing. Right there. That dot, that bullseye, that zeroed in, focused thing is what the Hebrew alphabet is what the Shabbat is what the plan is, and is what Israel is, and is what the Mashiach is. It's the focus of his attention. And in the next half of the talk here tonight, we'll go into some verses where he says exactly that. So why am I carrying this thing around here? Moses, at one point, saw the burning bush. And he was out watching the sheep. And Yahweh says, he says, well, boy, this is pretty strange. I'm going to go take a look at it. So he goes to take a look at it, and all of a sudden this voice comes out of the bush. And it talks to him. And Moses says, well, how do I know it's really you? How do the leaders of Israel back in Egypt, how will they believe that I'm really talking to you? Does anybody remember the story there? It's in Exodus 3. And he says, take that stick and throw it on the ground. And it became a snake. Well, now some people render it that it actually became a crocodile. There's different ways to read that word. It's not necessarily just a little garden snake, but it was like this crocodile that he had to jump back from. And then he said, put your hand in your shirt and pull it out. And it was white as snow, leprous. And he said, now put it back in again. He put it in and he pulled it out, and now it's clean. And then he said, if they don't listen to your words of your voice, then they'll believe the voice of the first sign. And if they don't listen to the voice of the first sign, they'll listen to the voice of the second sign. And if they don't listen to that voice, then take some water and pour it on the ground, and it'll become blood. Do you see the message in the pattern? What's the pattern? Think about it. First of all, there was just tell them. That's just his voice. And then he gave him a voice, which was a sign, and he basically gave a voice, which is the second sign, which was his hand, right? So here was the serpent, which he was told to grab a hold of at the end. There's a voice, the sign is hand that was leprous and then clean. And if they didn't believe those, then he said, okay, it's what looks like a judgment of basically blood, which is basically you're dead. Look a little closer. The Creator just simply made things the way they are. That's the Yod. That's like, how do we know who's talking to us? Well, look at creation. He spoke in creation. He spoke in just the fact of what he made. The heavens declare the glory of Elohim. There's a Yod. What's the voice of this sign? Well, if we use the pattern of Yod He Vav He, the He is like the Torah instructions. This week is the color purple, right? The purple for the royal decrees, which is the Kaf and Lamed. We'll get into that in a minute. There's the Kaf and the Lamed, which is the Torah, which everybody thinks is this big, scary serpent, crocodile, snake, which everybody runs from, thinking it's this scary monster that'll bite you, that'll eat you, that if you even touch it, you're going to die. It's kind of like at the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Nazis finally opened up the lid and their faces melted. There's another place in the Scriptures where, I forget where it's in Jeremiah or Isaiah, but the people of Israel said, Who can live with this constantly consuming, burning fire? And there's a couple other places I was just reading in the Parashah and Exodus where the Israelites were constantly complaining. They said, will we ever stop perishing? This guy is just out to slaughter us one at a time. Thousands at a time. Tens of thousands at a time. Yahweh is just this butcher. He just wants to kill us. And yet they're the ones who said, no, we don't want to go into the land. Those giants are scary. And Yahweh says, I'll protect you. I'll wipe them out. You just go in. And they said, no, we'll die in the wilderness. He says, okay, you can have as you said, you'll die in the wilderness. We better be careful with what we say, because our words seem to have an impacting power to cause, to generate, to create the very thing. And if we say, well, I'm not speaking it forth. I'm just saying I'm afraid of it. Yahweh says, altira. The words I had on my shirt last week in red said, altira, do not fear. It's like some people say, well, if you say certain words, as a matter of fact, there's this song and there's this phrase, speak of the devil. Well, what it is don't speak of the devil, because if you do speak of the devil's going to show up, and then he'll do stuff to you. He'll poke you with his pitchfork or something. Is there truth to this? Is there any merit to the concept that if you speak certain words, something of the spiritual dynamic realm will happen? Everybody's nodding yes. I've heard stories, and I'm sure probably people have experienced things where that's true. Now, how can that be true? How can it be true that no matter what you speak, whether it's for positive, for negative, for good, or for bad, in line with Torah or contrary to Torah, that if you say certain words, it happens? Because that's the way this place was made. It's made that way. Now, certain people say, yeah, right. Blah, 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 blah. Abracadabra, hooky pooky, whatever. It doesn't matter what you say, because they don't believe it. Well, the scriptures also say there are those who say there is no God, there is no Elohim. They're fools. They can wallow in their foolishness the way a pig wallows in the mud. That doesn't mean it's true. It just means they're wallowing in their foolishness. So the question is, what does it matter what we say? What does it matter what Yahweh said? And what impact does what words have? You see, Kaf and Lamed in the Torah is all about words. He gave us words. If you read back in the Torah, where Yahweh says, I gave you words. You heard a voice. You saw no image. You didn't see a human, a male or a female. You didn't see an animal or a bird or an angel. You saw no image. Thus, do not make for yourselves an image in reference to me. Do not make any image of any likeness, of anything that's in the heaven above, the earth beneath, or the waters beneath the earth. Do not make them, bow down to them, regard them, and think of them as some sort of a picture window into this other realm. Don't do it, because as soon as you do, you've limited the reality, and you've now designed an Elohim over you who will have domination over you, because Yahweh says the one you look to is the one who dominates you. I'm compiling a bunch of other verses that we can go into, but that's a whole other matter. Just for what it's worth, we've got 2 hours per letter to talk about each week. I've just the things I've written down in my book that I could talk about, it could easily be 6 or 8 hours. And with other people find could easily be months per letter. So I'm having to bring these things down, but there could be many other classes of interactive observations like Gordon's, what he saw here, right? Regarding each letter. But I'm trying to show you the highlights so you'll grasp the concept of Lamed. If Lamed is teach and learn what? Words. Teach and learn words. Yahweh, it says in the New Testament, I believe, he said he chose the foolishness of preaching. The foolishness of preaching to be the vehicle, the venue by which his matters would be transmitted through time. He chose these words. We could elaborate, but I'll go on here. So if the Kaf and Lamed equals the Torah, which is the voice of the sign, which we think of it as a crocodile or serpent. Remember, he said, throw it down, and it really did turn into this beast. What did he say to Moshe? He said, grab its tail. Pick it up at the end. So I could sit here and put this picture together and say, what are we doing? Why are we going back to these words? After all, didn't everybody say they were happy that these words were done away with? Yahweh, maybe people have looked at the Torah like some sort of crocodile serpent, and they were done away with, and everybody was happy that the dragon has been slain. It was nailed to the cross, wasn't it? Wasn't the serpent nailed to the cross, so we don't have to worry about it, to blend a metaphor? Why are we grabbing it back up? Here it is, as it were, the end of time, and we are picking up this thing that everybody regards as a crocodile, serpent, dinosaur, furious lizard. He will bite you, and you don't grab a snake by the tail. You grab it by the head if you're going to capture the snake. This isn't about capturing the snake. This is about Yahweh said, hey, go pick it back up. Go pick up what you ran from a few minutes ago that could have done you in. Pick it back up, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. Interesting. That's what we're doing. We are regarding the Torah because we believe it to be Yahweh's scepter. You see, the Zadi, you might say, if the Ark of the Covenant is almost like the throne, the seat of Yahweh, the Zadi is a picture of the scepter of righteousness. And as we discussed the other day, what is the kaf, or what is good? What is goodness? What is righteousness? Simply doing what Yahweh said. Is it not? Could the word for good or righteous be calculated as any other meaning than conforming to Yahweh's prescribed standards of what to do or not to do? If you think back and say, well, think of all the laws of men. Any law, if it's a good law, it has to do with health and not detrition, right? It has to do with building up and not corroding one's mind or one's health or one's spirituality. Everything Yahweh said does that. We could go on and on about the matter, but think about it for a minute. Good has to do with these instructions. These are the 10 words. I don't know if you can see, but these are the same 10 commandments written on this stick as that were written on my shirt. That is the same exact words written in the paleo letters that we handed out last week to everyone. And for what it's worth, there's more people here than was here last week. I don't have any more with me. We'll get you some more. Anybody who wants them can have them. These are the words we're supposed to teach and learn. So for us to pick up this at the end of time, like we are now, and say, it'll turn back into a scepter. It only looks like a crocodile serpent for the while that Yahweh says, throw it down. Throw it down, and it looks like a crocodile serpent. If you take hold of it, it is the scepter of righteousness, Yahweh's standard of his kingdom. You know, we have a picture of Yeshua ruling in Jerusalem, ruling the heavenly realm, with a staff in his hand, the rod of iron. This is a picture of the rod of iron, which is simply righteousness, goodness, ahava, which is love, chesed, tender loving kindness, emet, which is truth. He said, have truth and kindness around your neck. That is his standard. Mishpat is right ruling. You don't give bribes to the judge, and the judge doesn't give favor to the wealthy or the powerful. That's good. That's righteous. That's all this is right, true, fair, kind, just. That's Yahweh's standard. The Torah is nothing more than that. What does it mean to love Yahweh? Quit ripping each other off. Quit taking bribes. Don't move your neighbor's property line. Don't lust after your neighbor's goods and want to take them. I mean, it's all about right ruling. The word mishpat, which if you start studying the Torah, you'll see used quite often. It's one of the things Yahweh says is his hallmark of his kingdom. It's the symbol of his kingdom. It's spelled mem, shin, pei, tet, mishpat. The word shofet is judge. Mishpat is the place of the judge, or that which comes from right judging, which is, it's translated right ruling. But you say, oh, what are all these right rulings? It's just like, what is it, Laura Schlesinger says, now go do the right thing. That's what that is. That's mishpat. Just go do the right thing with a kind heart. Oh, Yahweh's such a big bad guy, right? He's such a big bad monster. He wants us to do the right thing with a kind heart. That's how we should treat one another. The point is, the voice of the first sign that we're supposed to grab at the end is the Torah. That's why we are taking up learning the Torah, is to grab the crocodile by the end and have it turn into the scepter of righteousness where Yahweh reigns, where Yeshua is exalted as the King of Kings to the kavod, to the great glory of Yahweh. What's this voice of the second sign? He said, take your hand of flesh and stick it in your shirt and it'll come out leprous. Bury it and it'll come out as leprous. Bury it again and it comes out clean. Well, if we're going to follow the pattern of Yod, He, Vav, He, where the second one was a He, right? There's Yod, there's He, then this must be the Vav. Who's the Vav man? Well, if that's the Mashiach, he came down here clothed in flesh of the hand of Yah reaching down to help us, and we chopped him up and buried him. And he became sin for us. He became leprous. He became the body of corruption. But yet, once he was buried, right, when he came back out, he was completely clean and whole and of a new nature. So there's the voice of here, well, what's going to happen to the Vav man? He comes down here, he gets corrupted, he becomes corruption, and then all of a sudden he becomes clean. You can run these things further. I'm just throwing these out to think about it. And then here's the second He. So if this is the Creator, and this is the Torah, and this is the Mashiach, then what is the second He? Well, Yeshua said, I'm going to leave and send you the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, to lead you in the paths of truth, the Comforter. He will lead you in the paths of truth. If we haven't seen the creation, if we haven't read the Torah, if we don't recognize Mashiach, what's he going to do? This doesn't say, okay, I'm going to lead you on another path. I'm going to lead you in another way. I'm going to come up with another covenant. I'm going to come up with another deal. I'm going to come up with another thing to catch your... No. See, what he said here was, if you don't listen to the first three voices, it's the judgment of death. You don't get a fourth voice to give you another covenant and another terms that you like a little better, which are a little easier, which means, what's easier than doing justice and kindness with a loving attitude to one another? I get the privilege and the prerogative of lying, cheating, stealing, and killing, and yet be forgiven? Is that the covenant that we've gotten instead of what Yahweh said about doing justice and kindness? Is that good? Is that, the word is tov. Is that righteous? So here, let me ask a question. Yeshua said, I'm the good shepherd. Lamed is the shepherd's staff. I'm the good shepherd. Well, now, once other time, somebody said to him, hey, good teacher. He's going to ask him a question, and Yeshua stopped right there and says, who are you calling good? There's nobody good but Elohim. Would anybody disagree? There's nobody good but Elohim. Okay, for Yeshua to call himself the good shepherd, and if shepherding has to do with teaching and leading and protecting the flock, what are the standards or the attributes of the good shepherd? Wouldn't they have to be exactly those of Elohim? I mean, they couldn't be contrary, right? Or else he wouldn't be good. If the standards of the Almighty Yod He Vav He are truth, and Yeshua said later, anybody who makes and perpetuates, devises falsehood, listen to this. Anybody who makes, crafts, generates, propagates falsehood has no place in my kingdom. What are we teaching and learning? Is it the truth? Were we given the truth? What is the measure of truth? Going back to the Zadi and the Kuf. The word Anoki, which is the first word of the Ten Commandments, Anoki, or Anki, Yahweh El Heka. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. But this word translated I am, there's probably half a dozen different words that are translated I am. But this one, Aleph, Nun, Kaf, Yod, this is, as a suffix, means my, and these three words, Anak, is actually plumb line. So one way to read I am is also my plumb line, which is the first word of the Ten Commandments. Well, that's the same concept of this thing hanging down from the up above that registers perfect vertical, which is itself a picture of the Kuf, which is itself a picture of the pillar of fire pillar of smoke, or the question mark and the exclamation point, over the Ark of the Covenant. You see how these things all tie together? And do you remember what passed through the split animals when Abraham was making his covenant with Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh? He split the animals. He was knocked out into this kind of wasn't a sleep. It was kind of like this twilight zone. And it says two things passed through, right? But the way Hebrew works is it might have been one thing with two attributes. It says a blazing furnace. What does a blazing furnace look like? I would suggest that a blazing furnace is really this vortex flame of fire shooting up, like the top of this scepter here, a blazing torch and a smoking furnace. What does smoking furnace look like? A black, billowing cloud. So you've got another image of one thing passing through, not necessarily two, that looks like the question mark and exclamation point, which is a picture of Yahweh's presence, which is a picture of Yahweh's kuf, and zadi, which is his instructions that he wrote with his fingers on the table of stone. Now, this stuff all looks really scary, right? You've got this pillar of fire, you've got this pillar of smoke, you've got these crocodile, you've got the judgments of blood, and yet in Exodus, I'll show you the words later. It says he wrote with the finger of Elohim on the tables of stone. What picture do you get of the word fingers, the finger of Elohim? Well, interestingly enough, the word in Hebrew for finger, and it's got it written down, I'll bring it up later, next session, is the word for paint, dye, and color. Hence this. The word for finger painting is redundant. Finger and paint is the same word. You see, the colors of Elohim is the same thing as saying the finger of Elohim. And so this whole business where we have this chart with all the letters in colors, and then there's lines. You see, the letter Kaf, as we said last week, was a picture, an image of lines, like the palm branches. But the other thing about the letter Kaf, and again, if you look in the Red Dictionary, you'll see it's the bent part of the hand, something coved, like the bent part of the sole of the foot, something cup-shaped is the letter Kaf. So when you have a rainbow with the different stripes, that's the picture of the letter Kaf. It's something striped, and it's the different colors. But what are the colors? Yahweh's fingers that he wrote on the table of stone. Do you see the imagery? If you looked at the rainbow and said, I see Kaf and Lamed. In a rainbow? It's bent and it's got lines. That's the Kaf. The Kaf is the instructions of the Torah that he put on the tables of stone, written by his finger, which is like the Lamed, the thing that we're supposed to teach and learn, which are words, which are letters. So when you see the colors of the rainbow, if you think, well, the word for finger is also digitized, like the digits of the finger. If you put something into a binary code, you're digitizing it. If you're like reading a barcode or pixels on a television, it's all a computer language. It's digitized. It's also the same word for dwarf or midget. It's kind of like there was this movie years ago that became kind of a colloquialism, Mini-Me. You know, the midget guy next to the other guy, Austin Powers, I think is what it was. Well, Mini-Me. It's like, oh, haha, that's kind of silly. Literally, the word for paint, color, dye, and finger is mini-me, a small version of myself. And what did Yahweh do with his finger? He wrote the letters on the tables of stone, as it were the colors, which were versions of himself in small form. And so we talked about this verse in Jeremiah 31:31, where he says, I will make a new covenant, and no more will any man have to say, oh, you should know Yahweh, for they all know me, from the least of these to the greatest. Well, that word least of these is like these little tiny things. It's spelled kuf-tet, where we get the word, that's like a cute, right? Cute, little cutie things. Little digits, little colored digits, until the word Gedolim, Gedol is a tower. We talked last week about, I believe it was, about a migdal. being like a castle. The Migdal of David is right there in Jerusalem. Of course, it was built by Turks and Saracens and Crusaders and all, but the word Migdal is this tower that you can't knock over. So this thing in Jeremiah 31:31 says, no more will anybody say, oh, you should know Yahweh, and it's like, because they'll all know me. But the word me is spelled Aleph, Vav, Tav, which is where we get, it's the word oat. Tav can be pronounced as a TH. It virtually means an oath. It's a sign, it's a signal, but it's also a letter of the alphabet. So you put all these things together, and I'm just trying to sefer these concepts. What you're seeing is that what Yahweh wrote with his finger, letters of the alphabet, each one can be seen as a color, because it's the same word for writing with your finger. He wrote with colors, and he wrote his oath. He wrote with letters of the alphabet. Each letter of the alphabet describes his oath, which is his covenant, which is his commandments to his people. And when we think, oh, commandment, oh, now that's something we're going to have to do, we're obligated to take on a burden. I'm emphasizing these words because each one of them sounds oppressive. But you see, everything has two voices. And if we could read his words as his gift, remember the kaf was a gift. It's also a covering. A kippah, a kippur, Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the day when your sins are washed away, atoned for, removed forever. And if we thought, what if there was a different way to read these words? So instead of thinking them as this burdensome obligation, this thing that we're now responsible for, that we can't do, that he knows we can't do, that no matter what we're going to do, we're going to fail and he's going to kill us, like the children of Israel say, when will we ever stop perishing? This guy is all about just killing us. They misread his words that he wrote with his own finger as beautiful colors, like looking at the rainbow and say, can you read the rainbow? Well, so here, the color white actually is all the colors combined. And you put white light through a prism, and it breaks down the frequencies so you can see the different colors. So for us to read his words is like seeing the truth of he himself, the pure white, full one, which is like inapproachable light. You can't even look at the light, like looking into the sun. He shines it through the prism of letters so that we can see his oath, which is like each letter is like a mini-me of him. Each letter is a mini-me of Yahweh himself in a way that we think, oh, the cute little thing. Even a tiger looks cute when it's little. Right? Any animal looks like a cute little thing when it's little. So that's what he gave us. He gave us these letters. He said, look, just learn these things. They're pictures of me. So let's go back to some dangerous ground. Why is it that people can say certain words and have things happen in the spiritual dimension? Why is that? Because it's made that way. But more than that, does anybody remember the story in the New Testament about the 7 sons of Shiva? Remember that story? 7 sons of Shiva. Does anybody want to venture a guess as to why the guy's name was Shiva? Did his mother call him Shiva? Any thoughts? Huh? That's right. The word Shiva means 7. Sheen, Bet, Ayin. We just got through with counting 7 sevens for the festival of Shavuot. If you put a Sheen Bet, I believe it's a Yod Ayin, Yod, Shavia, that's 7. It's a group of 7. So for this guy to be called Shiva literally means 7. So one might say, well, was he called 7 and he ended up having 7 sons? It's like, gee, that's interesting. Who would have guessed? Or was he called, hey, he's Mr. 7 because he's got 7 sons? Nevertheless, the point is that's a story. But why should he be called 7 and why should he have 7 sons? If you know what Hebrew says, the word 7 is also the word for oath. Hey, that's just like the word Aleph Vav Tav, right? It's also the word for curse, and it's all based on giving a vow or something done 7 times. Hence, if you know how to read this, you'll realize keeping the Sabbath day is the evidence of fulfilling a vow. Every week, you get to do it again. around and around and around and around and around. Every single week that you keep the Sabbath day, you are reaffirming your vow to Yahweh that says, you're mine and I'm yours. Ani Ladodi and Vedodi Li. I am my beloved is mine. Every week that you keep the Sabbath day, that's what he gave us. Every year that you keep the festivals. So here you have every week, and yet every year you're going around and around. So it becomes this picture of a wheel within a wheel, right? You got the 7 festivals throughout the year and every week. According to the vow that Israel made to Yahweh on Mount Sinai, they said, and these are the words I had written on white in my shirt, it says, all the words, Kol HaDebarim. Remember, Kaf Lamed means all. The interesting thing about Kaf Lamed, Lamed Kaf, we'll get into that later in the next session. This means all, and this means basically to you. It's also translated as go. And you could say, oh, Yeshua said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. He said, Lakal Kal Haaretz, go into all the world, basically. Those two letters are the center of the whole alphabet, right? It's 11, like the letter 11 and the 2 fingers in the Kaf, and then this is the word 12, which has to do with government, authority. So you have 10 letters here, you got another 10 letters there for a total of 22. It's the center, so you have this chiastic structure, X-shaped pattern. These are the 2 letters right in the middle. Tony Robinson talks about that for people who are interested. The point is, he gave an oath, and the people of Israel said, all the words that Yahweh said, Shema, we will hear, and Asha, Aleph Shin Hey, we talked about Asha last week, we will do. They set up Israel to be burdened under an obligational oath for the rest of eternity on the face of this earth, Leolam, Lamed, Ayin, Leolam. And as we said, universe construction, which was Ayin Lamed Mem, there's 2 different meanings. This has the Vav in it. That's a whole different thing. But I'm just trying to make you familiar with recognizing certain words. That's why I'm doing this, though we're not going into it. When they set themselves up, Yahweh says, okay, this is what it is. I'm going to do something throughout the rest of the span of Earth's existence for the people of the inheritors of this covenant of Israel, which answers the question, who is the Kaf? Who is you? Remember we asked that last week? Who is the Kaf? The inheritors of the covenant. What is their obligation? To Lamed these words from generation to generation. And if they do, they get the blessing. If they don't, they get the curse. And if you have those spectacles on that says, I'm going to now read the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and I'm going to look for every single place where this subject matter is mentioned. I was talking to somebody the other day, and it's like, for years, for 40 years, I read the Bible, and I don't remember ever seeing this. What's the difference? I'm given the first 5 years I didn't read. I spent 40 years reading the Bible since I was a little kid, and I spent the last 10 years reading the Tanakh, in trying to learn Hebrew and all. So I'm saying for 40 years, I read the Bible. It's like, why didn't I ever see this story? And as we were discussing it, the bottom line was because we thought it was ancient history talking about somebody else for another time and place. If you ever read the story of the 3 little pigs, now you might say, hey, I better build with bricks instead of straw or wood. It's a fairy tale. Oh, but I know it's something I should tie into my real life, so I'm going to learn how to build with bricks and rocks. But this is ancient Israel. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. So we just read it as history, blah, blah, blah. Hey, I'm going to get onto the New Testament because now that's talking about esoteric philosophies that I can apply to make my life work. The problem is it's the other way around. You see, in the Tanakh is the structure of the sworn oath of which curse we're under because of what our ancestors and forefathers inherited. So the question is, what of the New Testament, which is actually the commentary of the Old Testament, I know that'll rile some feathers, but the point is the New Testament is commentary about the Tanakh, how to apply it situationally. But if you're not the you, If you're not the kaf of the Israel, of Yahweh's sworn oath, what right do you have of anything, even in the New Testament? And then you come up to where Yeshua says, I have not been sent, it's in Matthew 15, I believe, I have not been sent except for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He was the good shepherd. He came to bring them back to the derek, the way of the truth of Yahweh. And he says, I've come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And then the lady says, yeah, but I want some of that. And he says, it's not right to give the dogs the food for the children. And she says, but even the dogs get to eat the scraps that fall from the table. And Yeshua said, you're right. Tell you what, you can have a few scraps. Go be healed. See you later. I'm off to my mission. I think we're up against a break here, Jamie. Is that right? I lost track of the numbers that you were holding up. 1 minute? 1 minute. So the question is, I mentioned before, Jamie has actually on the internet, when we were talking one day, we were saying, what if the Christians had actually kept the covenant? It was available. What if Israel had actually kept the covenant? Where would we be today after 2,000 years if we had been keeping the covenant? I would propose to you, and we'll talk about this after the next break, that we've been getting nothing but scraps off the table because we never ate at Yahweh's table. And therefore, when we speak words, let me ask you this. I'll ask you this, and you can think about it, and we'll speak about it when we come back. What is sorcery? Isn't that learning incantations? If you read in the Red Dictionary under the word for sorcerer, it means to peep and mutter. Saying words as a formula that's going to cause something to happen. Now Yahweh says, you keep my covenant, and I will make the weather behave, I will slaughter your enemies, and I will give you the promised land, and I will bless you abundantly. That's the terms of the covenant. But if we figure out special words, and I'm not putting down the truth of this, but if we figured out that, if you say in Jesus' name, or if you say, by the name or by the blood, hey, look at something that's going to happen. This guy's healed, this guy's doing this. Read Deuteronomy 13. He says, if somebody comes to you, and they had a dream, or they saw a vision, and even if it comes true, remember those words of prophecy that come true are the evidence of a true prophet from Yahweh. And if those things come true, and if he tries to lead you astray from these words, this is a test from Yahweh to see if Israel will quickly leave the path of these words. And which time, when Yahweh sees what you'll do, you should put that prophet to death. I would say that if Jesus Christ or Paul tried to change these words, both of them ought to have been put to death. Fortunately, they didn't. But we were told they did. So then, now we've got trouble, we've got a lie. But I would say that anybody who doesn't keep these words, doesn't regard the Shabbat, and we will look at a couple verses where Yahweh says how important the Shabbat is. What is the difference between sorcery and speaking magic words to manifest a healing if you're not Israel keeping the covenant? What's the difference? I think it's time for a break.